Hey everyone, Clay here. It is Friday the 13th, 2022, and we thought it would be fun to release the first episode of last year's Patreon coverage of the Friday the 13th series here on the main feed so you all can celebrate appropriately. And if you'd like to hear our coverage of the rest of the series from Friday the 13th Part 2 all the way through to the 2009 remake, those episodes can be found on patreon.com/thepenskyfile. Thanks for the support and enjoy a Friday the 13th. Welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show. Hey everyone, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about movies. We usually talk about movies off of the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Greatest Horror Films of All Time list, but as this is our Patreon special, we wanted to do something that is not covered at all, not represented on the list whatsoever. There are many franchises that are represented, but this is not one of them. Of course, I'm joined by Amanda. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm okay. You remember my name?
I do. I can't remember where I am, but I remember who you are. So,
Good.
One check mark. We will be covering. This is the first in our series of covering the entirety of the Friday the 13th franchise. I looked it up to see what the Rotten Tomato score was for Friday the 13th. Because I figured, the way that this list works, you'd think
bananas.
At least the first one would make it, right?
Yeah.
Just on like zeitgeist alone, because there seems to be that seems to have some implication as to how these things are ranked. No, and more importantly, none of the other ones will be on the list either, because this first movie we're covering, Friday the 13th, the original, Rotten Tomatoes score of 64%. It's the only one in the series above 50% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I am shocked.
I kind of am too, because I mean, these have to be older reviews that are based on older reviews that are not taking into account like cultural reconsideration and stuff. Because I know a lot of people who consider Part 2 to be the best of them, and Part 2 has a 27% Rotten Tomatoes score.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's really low.
Yeah. And even Freddy versus Jason has a 41% score, and I mean, come on. That's at least a 60%. That movie's great, but we'll get to that when we cover it.
I'm blown away by the ratings for this entire franchise. Like, I could even forgive the sequels and the later movies having lower ratings, but the fact that the first one, the original, everybody knows this movie. Like, even if you haven't actually seen it, you know references to it.
I would argue that there's a lot of movies on the list that don't get there without this movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And we can get into that as we get into the movie.
Yeah.
And even the remake. The remake, I feel like is actually fairly well regarded, and that has 26% Rotten Tomato score, which I mean, that just seems like they're being mean.
I haven't seen the remake, so I can't speak to that one, but I also just find it.
You haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet. I find it interesting. I don't mean to like jump the gun, but
no, please do.
I am somebody who, if people have listened to earlier episodes of this podcast, you would know this about me. I love the movie Halloween, the original, and I enjoy several of the sequels. I cannot tell you how many people, when they're like, "Oh, what's your favorite like classic horror movie, slasher flick, whatever, and I say Halloween 100% all the way, so many people are like, not Friday the 13th? Friday the 13th's better.
Yeah.
I'm just
Those
so
people
confused.
Where
are those people?
Wrong. And that's
well, they're wrong, but they're also clearly not using Rotten Tomatoes.
That's true. And I mean, the one thing that we do know is that Rotten Tomatoes is the be-all, end-all of movie ranking and should be regarded as such.
Yes, it's the definitive resource for exactly how good or bad a film is.
Yes. So, what's your history with this franchise? Because I think the thing that's going to be really interesting about this, and we're going to do one of these one a month, which is going to work out really well because it's so frustrating that there's only 12 of these movies. Like, get it together, guys. Do one more and just make that part of my brain, the completest part of my brain, not crack every time I think about it.
Yeah, and there's so many great opportunities for ways to play with the name, like what to name the film.
Yeah, F1313.
Right, just call it Friday.
Yeah, that would be confusing with that other series that's called Friday. But yeah, I am not a huge and never have been a huge Friday the 13th fan. I actually, for a long time, my favorite movie in the series was Jason Goes to Hell, which I'm sure will cause a lot of people to just like groan and vomit. But because it's not it's not a traditional Friday the 13th movie, and I think that's kind of why I liked it, because by the time it came out, that formula was kind of played out, so I thought it was kind of fun that they went a different route, I guess. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, I am not a huge fan of these movies, but I do respect them for what they are and the place that they occupy in horror movie history. But you are more of a fan of them than I am, I think, right?
I don't know. So I enjoy them for what they are, but I don't have they're almost just kind of like fun and funny to me.
Sure.
Like when I watch them, it's not necessarily because I'm in the mood to watch a scary movie. Like I typically watch Friday the 13th usually sometime over the summer. It's like a very like summer movie to me.
Sure.
I just kind of put it on in the background. It's like, I don't know. But so it's interesting because I think for me, one of the reasons why this particular film and this whole franchise never really hit for me the way it does for some people is that I knew the twist before I saw it.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the movie Scream ruins it for you.
Sure does.
Yep.
Yeah, it is one of those. That's one of the things I am looking forward to talking about is because it's one of those things when you get into horror movies, like the first thing you learn is that Jason was not the killer in the first Friday the 13th movie, you know? That's the first time your mind is blown as a horror movie fan, is when somebody tells you that, or you watch it and you find that out. And
yeah,
it is
preferably the second option.
Right. And it is it's usually the kind of thing I've found it's the kind of thing where people say it as kind of like a that Jason's not the killer in the first one, right? Like it's a point of what's the word I'm looking for? Superiority in trivia kind of thing. It can be kind of like that. But it is the first step in what is the most clumsy handoff into a franchise that I can think of.
Yeah.
And honestly, one of the things that always put me off about this series, and it puts me off about Halloween as well, but somehow Halloween I think has worse movies overall, because the Friday movies are kind of they're all very similar and they're all kind of fun in the same way. The Halloween movies I've always felt like are trying to do something interesting, but they just fail at it miserably. and
I
they
think
are
that's
not.
why I like them more, though. Well, because I enjoy seeing the attempt, like the fact that there is a little more thought behind some of the Halloween franchise movies. I appreciate that they are attempting to go somewhere with them at least. Whereas, yeah, the Friday movies are kind of just like, we've found our formula and we're sticking to it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that really kills the Halloween franchise for me kind of is yes, is similar to this franchise for me in that the look of Jason is very, very inconsistent, and they don't really. Everybody kind of has their favorite, I guess, but I've never thought that he looks particularly really good until I watched through these movies a couple years ago. And I realized they didn't really figure it out until part 8, which is the last one and generally the worst one. But he looks amazing in that movie.
Huh.
And I have the same problem with Halloween. Halloween, if you don't nail the mask, the whole thing falls apart. Like, it does not work for me whatsoever if you don't get the look of that mask and the look of Michael Myers correct. And as far as I'm concerned, they only got it right twice, which was in the original one and the most recent one.
Yeah, I think I'm a little less sensitive to sort of maintaining a very specific appearance for the lead villain, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I think the franchise where it actually really bothers me is the Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy. That's
interesting, because I feel the exact opposite. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like Freddy is so specific looking because it's actually his face. And so when that changes, like, it's just kind of weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how did he change his... Anyway, whereas with Jason and Michael Myers, they're wearing masks. So you can kind of logic your way into, like, oh, he needed a replacement mask, or, you know, it's weathered over the years and things like that.
I do appreciate, though, that after part 4, the mask is consistent in where it's been damaged and where it's been weathered. I do appreciate that.
Oh, I don't think I noticed.
Yeah, because he gets chopped in the head, I think, in the 4th one, and from that point on, there's always a machete chop in the corner of the mask.
Oh, that's a cool detail. I like that.
Yeah. And it's tough because in Friday the 13th, they always have somebody different play until Kane Hodder comes around. You always have somebody different playing Jason, which brings a different level of physicality to it that may or may not work for you, and a different look, and the clothing that they wear is different. And so I guess it's nice because everybody can kind of have their favorite, or if you're like me, you don't like any of them until the worst one. But I'm telling you.
It gives you something to be mad about.
The photography in Jason Takes Manhattan, the photography of Jason is fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. But anyway, before we get there, we have to start at the beginning, all the way back in 1980 with Friday the 13th. So we're going to take a quick break, play the trailer, and then we'll talk about it.
Hello? Who's that? Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
1, 2, 3.
We weren't doing anything. We were just messing up.
4. 5. 6.
'Must be my imagination.
7. 11. 12. Friday, the 13th. You may only see it once, but that will be enough. Friday, the 13th.
All right, Friday the 13th, 1980, directed by Sean Cunningham, written by Victor Miller, starring Betsy Palmer, Adrienne King, Kevin Bacon, and the slippery sanguine stylings of Tom Savini, SFX.
Wow.
I know, I worked hard on that one.
Yeah.
Amanda, what happens in Friday the 13th?
Crystal Lake's history of murder doesn't deter counselors from setting up a summer camp in the woodsy area. Superstitious locals warn against it, but the fresh-faced young people, Jack, Alice, Bill, Marcie, and Ned, pay little heed to the old-timers. Then they find themselves stalked by a brutal killer. As they're slashed, shot, and stabbed, the counselors struggle to stay alive against a merciless opponent.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So, Clay, some of the things you're going to find in this movie include...
Yes.
Steve Christie, the original Never Nude.
Yeah, that's I don't know if there's a modern version of that look where he's just got the pants on, but that's the Never Nude is probably the closest you're going to get.
I think that's the closest analog we have to it.
And is he wearing that? He's wearing that when he's being like creepy with her, right? And like brushing her hair.
Yes. Yes.
just really trying to let his chest hair do the work of that seduction, I guess.
Yeah, and the mustache, of course.
Yes.
Yes. A really comfortable looking cable knit murder sweater.
It looks so warm. Like I
It
imagine
looks real cozy.
I believe they were shooting this movie in like September or something, so it was pretty cold where they were. So she must have just been very comfortable the whole time. I can just have to assume.
Yeah, the only woman on set at a reasonable temperature.
Yeah.
Cultural insensitivity.
You're gonna find it everywhere around here, so you may as well embrace it, I guess.
Yeah, it's not even really worth trying to name a specific scene. There's a lot. Casual, terrible old Hollywood impressions.
Surprisingly a lot. Like
yeah. This is not a thing I ever thought I'd have to be concerned with.
Yeah. I feel like the comedy of this movie is written by someone who doesn't really know what being funny is. So
Or like what teens do.
yeah, that's probably more specifically that. But it feels very much like comedy written by your dad or something.
Being outclassed athletically by an old lady.
She does a lot. She throws.
I swear.
She throws a fully grown woman through the window of the kitchen of a cabin.
Yeah.
She's got that angry mom Hulk strength, I guess.
All adrenaline all the time. Kevin Bacon, but not nearly enough bacon bits.
Oh, Amanda. Keep it
Hey.
in your Speedo. Jesus.
You wrote that one, okay?
You are married. You are married.
It's fine. He'd be fine with Kevin Bacon too. And this one's my contribution. Excellent parenting.
Excellent parenting.
Excellent.
Much like the twist in this movie, I bet you weren't expecting that from this show.
Look, this movie is about a truly devoted mother.
It really is. That is really what it comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah. A mother's love for her child.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about this for me is if you look at the pedigree of this movie, because I think that's a good place to start. Self-admitted, the writer, Victor Miller, said one day Sean Cunningham called him up and said, Halloween's making a lot of money. Let's rip it off. And so that's
Gotta
what
love
they
that
did.
honesty.
Yeah, and Victor Miller said so he went to see Halloween, he took a bunch of notes of what you need to make a horror movie, and then he found the formula, and then he just made his own. And it seemed to work. but I think it's giving short shrift to some things where that came before this, because you've got Halloween, but honestly, I think there's a lot more Black Christmas in this movie than people give it credit for. Whether it's the what am I looking for here? Whether it's the completely point of view shot killer, which they do in Halloween a bit, but not to the extent that they do in Black Christmas.
Right.
You've also got the fact that they really don't give you anything as far as information about why people are being killed or who's being killed or who's doing the killing. They give you more in this movie than they give you in Black Christmas, but here they play a lot. They play stuff closer to the vest in this than they do in Halloween.
Yes.
In a much more similar way to Black Christmas.
Yeah.
And there's also a movie by Mario Bava, an great Italian horror filmmaker, called Bay of Blood, which is shockingly similar to this. It actually even contains, I think, one or at least one kill that is almost shot for shot the same.
Really?
Yeah, I was thinking about if not doing Bay of Blood as a wild card on the regular show, I was thinking about maybe having that be the 13th episode of this show, just because I'd be interested to go back and watch that again, like academically, and compare it to this.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, but and you've also got the entire Italian giallo subgenre, which I think this is born of. This feels to me like the true American streamlining of all. And I'm sorry, I didn't even mention Psycho. The music is basically just like Psycho. What if it was the shower scene music, but for the whole movie?
Yes.
That sounds dismissive, but of Henry Manfredini, the composer, he does write really nice music for these movies. But it's clear where the inspirations are coming from.
Yeah.
And even Carrie, we talked about that when we were doing Carrie. The end of this movie doesn't play out the way it does without Carrie.
Yeah.
But this is really the American homogenization and streamlining of those horror concepts into something that is punchy, it is short, and it works.
Yeah. Yeah, this is mass market capitalism at its best.
And it's terrifying. One of the things that they've carried over, that they pulled out of this research that they did, is the idea of taking something that is fairly benign generally, whether it's college, a college sorority in Black Christmas, or the suburban street in Halloween. In this case, you've got a summer camp, and they just throw that through the nowhere is safe ringer.
Yeah.
It's a nice change. It's a nice inversion, and I think it's a good place to start, or it's a good setting for a movie like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's this beautiful, idyllic. I mean, the whole area, even the little town that she Annie, I think it is at the beginning, the girl. Mm-hmm. Like, it's kind of like a little old middle of nowhere town, but like it's very pretty. There's like big bright greenery everywhere. People are kind of standoffish, but they're generally friendly and nice. Somebody gives her a ride.
I love that Crazy Ralph shows up and he gives
Ralph.
her the "you're all gonna die" speech, and the guy who gives Annie a ride completely brushes him off, and then while they're driving, he gives her like an even more intense version of the story.
Right, because now it's coming from a relatively sane person and not just the crazy man on his bicycle. But yeah, the setting is just, they get to the camp and the lake is pristine and the trees are beautiful and there's bird song and like the crickets and the frogs are always kind of croaking. It's very, very beautiful. It's very like idyllic summer vacation kind of thing. Yeah.
And the I think setting it at a summer camp also adds in it's this interesting level of increased stakes that are there implicitly but never actually pay off because you assume that, well, that means there's theoretically kids involved, even though kids, I don't think kids show up in these movies at all until the fifth one at least.
Oh wow.
At least not like camp kids anyway.
Right.
But but sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just like I get what you're saying. Like if you're watching this, say for the first time back when it came out, you don't know that. You might think that at some point in this movie, children are going to show up.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, there's that added anxiety kind of hanging over your head.
Do you think, not to jump to like a big overall critique of it right away, but you were saying that you put this on generally as sort of like a fun kind of movie, whatnot, and you think it doesn't, you think knowing the twist kind of hurt it. Do you think this movie still works in the 21st century?
That's an interesting question because I'm not really sure. I think when you watch it now as a modern viewer, it just feels so distant. It feels like such a bygone era. Like even when, I was looking at this and I realized that it came out in 1980, I was kind of shocked. I really thought it was older than that.
Yeah, it feels that way, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's very clear they kind of modeled it more on the 70s horror movies that were its predecessors rather than trying to push the envelope into something more modern. They even just aesthetically, like, I know it was 1980, so probably when it was filmed it was, still 79 or whatever, but it just doesn't feel like it's trying to be more modern than, like, in a lot of ways Black Christmas feels more modern because at least there's a phone.
Right. Yeah.
Like, yeah. So in this, it's tough because when you watch it now, it's just so far from current reality. Like, even the fact that these people are probably, the kids are probably, 18, 19 maybe?
In movie age, yes. They're probably older than in real life, though.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. But could you imagine, like, she's hitchhiking and
right.
they're all going to work this job that, I mean, they're all like, there's a couple people here and there who, are friends. Kevin Bacon and his girlfriend and Ned show up together. But it's like, where did these people find out about this job? When they found out about it, had they met the owner before? It doesn't seem like it. They just showed up to this place in the middle of nowhere. And the setup just starts to feel very unbelievable when you're looking at it through like a more modern lens. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot about this movie that like I enjoy, but I don't think it works as well now as it probably did when it came out.
Well, I mean, it's a timeless film because as we see right at the beginning, after the cold open in 1958, the next date it says is present day, which means the present. Yes. Yeah, it's I think I feel like it works in some areas better than others, and I think the biggest detriment to it is even more so, like as I was saying, this movie's kind of like the crystallization of all of these other, for lack of a better term, let's say better or maybe headier horror movies that are going around.
Sure.
This is the one that the tropes are built off of. You can look back at Halloween, but it's like, well, okay, I can see where that stuff comes from, but it's not all quite there. You can look back at Black Christmas and you go, oh, actually, Black Christmas is actually kind of progressive as far as that stuff goes and doesn't really fall into the general horror slasher tropes. But this one, when people make fun of that stuff or when people reference that stuff, generally it's in reference to this movie. Like, this is the one where that stuff crystallizes. No pun intended for the lake they're on. And I wonder if a big part of it is it has that sort of thing where, like, when you adapt something, like when you adapt a novel that's never been really directly adapted, but people have kind of stripped the good ideas out of it into more well-known stuff, like, you know, whether it's Star Wars taking all the stuff out of John Carter or Flash Gordon or something like that. When you finally adapt the original, you kind of go, I've seen all this before. I wonder if it doesn't work for that reason now, because it has birthed an entire structure, really, an entire world of horror movie structure that has been inverted, redone, subverted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's an interesting point because, this movie does kind of spawn its own subgenre. In a lot of ways, like
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but we talked about it when we covered a couple of years ago when we covered Nightmare on Elm Street, which we'll be putting out at some point when we get to it on our show. By the time Nightmare on Elm Street comes out in 1984, there's been 4 of these, and it has already set off this slasher movie boom from the early 80s, where you just had people ripping this off and ripping it off and ripping it off and ripping it off.
Ripping off the rip-off.
Right.
But yeah, it does, like, even, it's interesting, it kind of makes me think of, like, Cabin in the Woods, which is a movie that plays a lot with the idea that, like, these characters can be put in these very specific boxes that are almost like, it's almost like tradition to have, like, one of each type of character. And it's interesting because as much as this movie kind of spawned that and a lot of the tropes and the stereotypes, it doesn't actually, like, do it that explicitly in the movie itself.
Yeah.
Like, Ned is kind of a goon and a goof, but he's not considered a nerd, you know? Like, he's a little bit of a weirdo, but they're all still friends with him, and, like, he's not really, like, an outcast from the group, and
not as much as say, like, Franklin in Texas Chainsaw.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And then, like, Alice is a little more reserved than the other girls, but she's not, like, the virgin prude. She's right. You know, she's wearing her tiny bikini too, and it's heavily implied that she and the camp owner, Steve Christie, maybe spent the night together.
Right, yeah. We're not sure. He does say, she draws a picture of him, and he says, is that what I look like? And she said, that's what you look like last night. And I don't, it's not clear whether it's like a casual hanging out last night or more of like a Frankie Valli last night. No, they don't really get into that.
I think it's pretty heavily implied that it's more of like a Frankie Valli last night.
Yeah, they at least made out, I think. The way that he's based on how familiar he's being with her, it seems like something happened.
Oh yeah, and he calls her pretty at one point or beautiful or something.
Well, girls love that though.
Yeah. You should just call the girls that you employ that all the time.
Yeah, you just touch. They love it when you say that, and then you touch their hair while you're not wearing a shirt.
Gently pet their hair. Oh yeah, and he's trying to, like, convince her to stay, and like, yeah, there's definitely something that was going on there. So she's not this, like, innocent, virginal character, and the other girls aren't, like, you know, you see, is it Marcie? Is that Kevin Bacon's girlfriend?
Sure.
But, like, you know, you see them have sex, but it's clear from the beginning that they're actually in a committed relationship, and after they have sex, they're clearly still very in love. Like,
right.
It's not framed as this, like, oh, she's a slut and now she should die. Like, I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting that those tropes originate so strongly from this movie, but aren't as explicitly expressed in this one. I wonder if, because I'm not remembering any of the sequels that I've seen very clearly, I wonder if those solidify even further as you go through the franchise.
Well, one of the things that I'm looking forward to talking about, actually, as we go through, is how the cliche of the final girl that I think does get lumped into this movie quite a bit, or this franchise, is not really explicitly displayed the way that it is in a more stereotypical way. Like Alice is, like you said, Alice is not. She's probably the. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess she's not really explicitly any more prudish than anybody else. I mean, she's playing strip Monopoly, which sounds like the most boring fucking game I can think of. And she's smoking pot with everybody, and it's not like she's.
Yeah, she's
a
cracking open
wallflower.
a beer. She's like, she's down for it, whatever.
And in the second one, if I remember correctly, Ginny, the main character, is very explicitly, I don't mean explicitly like, they're showing it happen or anything, but she's pretty explicitly in a relationship with the guy who's fixing the camp up. So it's not like she's a very more outgoing, sort of capable character than Alice is. So she's not really the virgin wallflower. The third one, it's heavily implied that the girl in the third one was like sexually assaulted by Jason at some point.
Oh.
If I remember it correctly.
Yikes.
And so it's like I think too much weight gets put on that generally. Or at least the movies that followed these ones decided to lean more into that than this series does. But yeah, it's interesting to see how this franchise is sort of the ground zero for that stuff, but also doesn't do it the way it becomes traditionally known.
Yeah, totally.
And I think one of the things that I actually really like about this, and I do think works really well, is also sort of a lift from Psycho, where I think they do a good job of not making it clear who the main character is until people start getting picked off, because after the opening flashback, your entire focus is on Annie, and so you kind of assume that she's going to be the girl who makes it, or that she's the focus of the movie, so she's going to be the one who you're following through the story, which is very much not the case. And even when they get to everybody else, they don't zero in on Alice quite that much. You kind of get everybody a little bit everybody at the same time. So it's not really clear as it's going who's going to be the one who survives. And I think that element actually works really well still.
Yeah, I actually think it works really well, too, for the reasons that you mentioned, but also because when you watch it as a modern day viewer, the only actor you're going to know is Kevin Bacon.
Right.
And so I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, okay. Because, you see Annie, and then it switches to, I'm just going to keep calling him Kevin Bacon.
That's fine.
Kevin Bacon and Ned and Marcie in their truck. And so I remember the first time I saw it, when it makes that move and it goes to them driving to the camp, I was like, oh, okay, Kevin Bacon's the lead in this movie.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
And then he's not. And it's like, oh, well, I remember that being more surprising for me than the twist of who's the killer.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, as the series goes, it's clear from the jump who the main character is going to be, and so it's pretty clear who's going to survive. But yeah, I think they do a nice job of keeping it kind of ambiguous as to who's going to survive, if anybody. It reminds me a little bit of, I think they do that fairly well in Evil Dead as well. Because if you're going into Evil Dead and you don't know who Bruce Campbell is, and you don't know that he's the star of the franchise, there's no reason to expect him to be the one who makes it out of that movie alive, because he's just kind of like a guy in the background for most of it until everybody else goes nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Alien is the one for me that is like, it epitomizes this kind of style.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like bringing you into this kind of cast of characters and not really clearly situating with one person to focus on as an audience, and instead just sort of, as the group gets pared down over time, the person who is probably or hopefully going to survive emerges.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the other reasons why the other things that makes this movie still work in certain ways is weirdly, the fact that it is the outlier from the rest of the series, because it is very different. Because you've got this, as the series goes, it really starts to switch into more of like a bastardized Michael Myers situation, where Jason is the focus as much as anybody else is, if not more. And you're watching him doing the stalking. You're seeing him going after people. You're seeing him go through the woods and whatnot. Whereas in this one, it's not the killer you're expecting, because Jason wasn't the concept at this point. And the focus isn't on the villain. The focus is on the people who are trying to survive the situation. And I think that's what makes this one a little bit special from the removed from the rest of the series.
Yeah, I like that this movie does that, where it kind of decenters the point of view of the villain, of the killer. I also think it's interesting that this movie never kind of sets anybody up in the cast, in the original group, as like a red herring for like, oh, who's doing this? Like,
yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're never led to like suspect that, like, when creepy camp owner Steve Christie leaves, that he's actually, sneaking around in the woods and coming back to kill them.
Well, I was wondering, I was going to bring that up, because I honestly wasn't sure if they were trying to set up red herrings or not. It seemed like they kind of thought they were going to, but they never went through with it, because Mrs. Voorhees drives a Jeep. So does Steve. And I feel like there's a couple times where they're dancing towards implying that maybe Steve is doing it, but I honestly can't tell. And the same with I feel like there's some other instances where they are, I don't know if it's maybe Crazy Ralph, they try to imply maybe for a second might be the person doing it, but they don't really commit to that. But I was thinking that too, because it's like, it feels like this movie should be full of red herrings, but it's not.
Yeah. I don't, even these sort of like light implications are never deepened or pursued in any way that gives you a chance to even start formulating that suspicion fully before the movie itself has already kind of moved on to the next scene or the next concern. So it never like we were talking a little bit about Black Christmas, where there is a lot of kind of heavy-handed trying to imply that a character may be the killer. And this is the polar opposite of that, where, they might sort of like, there might be coincidences here and there, or somebody leaves and then you see somebody else and they get killed. But yeah, it's never really drawn out in any way where it's like, wait, what if Bill's doing it? It's like, no, Bill's definitely not doing it.
Yeah, it really is kind of it really is more of an Americanized giallo movie than it is a traditional, quote unquote, what becomes a traditional slasher movie. Because I don't know how familiar you are with Italian. I sound so fucking douchey saying that. I don't know how familiar you are with the Italian subgenre of the giallo film, Amanda. But
you have to do the rest of the podcast in that voice.
Yes. Well, generally, what happens in those movies is it's more of a murder mystery, but it's that's clearly where the American slasher came from. And it honestly, that's kind of where it goes back to in the 90s. Like, I would argue that the movies of the 90s, like your I Know What You Did Last Summer or your Screams or what have you, veer more towards giallo movies, because giallo movies are essentially just really violent murder mysteries. So you are a lot of times it's a first-person killer or if it's not directly first person, all you see is like a glove holding a razor blade or something when they stab people or whatever. But it's generally borne out through the story, who's doing this, the how and the why, and they usually throw some red herrings at you to kind of keep you on or off the scent. and there's usually like a big kind of Scooby-Doo type reveal at the end, which is what this movie is more than the ones that come after. The ones that come after are more Halloween and more like Texas Chainsaw, whereas this one feels a lot more European, the way they handle things in this film.
I mean, there's definitely kind of there's like a portion of the genre that's more Alfred Hitchcock or Agatha Christie than just pure like, oh yeah, there's just some crazy guy and he's killing people.
Right. It's usually a motive. There's more of a motive, and in this one there's a motive, but it's like it's so removed from. It's not like the motive isn't really part of the story. Like once you get to the motive, you go, oh, well that's actually pretty interesting. That makes a lot of sense. But it's not like it turns out that these kids are specifically the counselors who let Jason die. That kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. It almost feels like I wonder if because this movie is so like entrenched in our collective subconsciousness, like it's such a pop culture touchstone even today, we kind of forget and maybe overlook the fact that the motive and the killer really come out of left field in like the fifth act.
Oh yeah, big time.
Of this movie. Like it's real late in the game where she shows up and ends up explaining what is happening and why she is doing this.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I guess I just wonder if like we all sort of accept it and it seems to sort of work in general. People just sort of like roll with it. But I wonder if a movie like this was made now, would we all be watching it and be like, get to that point and just go, well, that's bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say,
bringing her in to solve everything, like, oh, okay, this is why everything's been happening. This is how it's worked. We're just going to do an 11th hour reveal with all this information we never had before as an audience.
Right. I was going to say the weird thing about this, if you really look at it, is I think a modern version of this movie shows you Jason die at the beginning. Like it shows you the counselors doing whatever they're doing that causes Jason's death.
Each other.
Yeah, doing each other. Yes. Which
Isn't
gives
that
you
what the mom thinks it is?
Yes, I believe so. Which gives you more of like an insight as to maybe why these killings are happening. But if you actually look at how this plays out, the opening scene is in 1958, and if I remember correctly, when the cop, it's the only time they bring it up, and out of context of the ending, if you don't know the ending, you have no idea why this matters. When the cop brings it up, it's either the cop or the truck driver, I can't remember who. He says that there was those killings in 1958, and that boy drowned in 1954 or 1953 or something. So it's not even like the same year that she kills everybody. She like stews on it for a few years, then kills everybody, then takes a 25-year break or whatever it is, or a 30-year break or whatever, and then comes back and kills people again. So it's not even like a direct through line, you know? It's very strange.
Yeah, and there's like mentions at a point where they're like, oh yeah, and then there were those unexplained fires.
Oh, does it say that too? I missed the fire line.
Yeah, I think he says something about the fires, and I think she even says something about like, I've tried to keep people away from this place or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's less that she's killing people because she's mad that they killed her son, and more that she just doesn't want people to be here.
Yeah, and there's almost an element of like, if people are there, she slips into this like psycho killer mode.
Yeah.
And starts talking with the voice of her drowned child. But if she keeps everybody away, then she doesn't have to do that. Like, she doesn't have to kill them. She can just be alone there with her memories or, you know, hallucinations of Jason, whatever you want to say.
I'm shocked that in the age that we live in, no one has jumped on that weird 4-year gap between Jason drowning and the first killings and made like an FX series out of it.
Oh yeah, like what's the one with Sarah Paulson right now? That's the nurse from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Ratchet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still haven't seen that. Still want to.
I don't know. I haven't heard great things. Did you watch? Speaking of sending up and ripping off. Ripping off isn't the right word, but sending up the structure of this movie. Have you seen American Horror Story 1984?
No, I know you've told me to,
It's very
and
good.
I intend to. I had given up. I was trying to watch like the Roanoke season, and I had kind of fallen off with that one. I was determined to finish it before I started another season. So
Yeah,
I'll get there.
Honestly, the thing that made it work so well for me is it's the first one I've watched in a while that doesn't just completely nosedive after the halfway point, because that's generally what happens in that show.
Yeah, which is such a bummer because I always like the first half of whatever season I watch, and then it hits that midpoint and things take a turn, and I'm just like, well, that was nice. I'm out now.
Is the Roanoke one the one where it's set up like a Discovery Channel show?
Yes.
Yeah, the first half of that is so cool. The way that they do that,
Yep.
is awesome. And then I felt the same way, where it was the second half. It just turns into like people screaming and getting tortured and stabbed and stuff, and that kind of lost me.
Yep. This has been 7-year-old American Horror Story spoilers with Clay and Amanda.
Apparently, you don't listen to the Batman show, because most of the Batman show we do is Sean and I talking about an episode of the cartoon for about 10 minutes, and then 25 minutes of talking about literally anything else.
I mean, the Batman the Animated Series episodes were pretty short, right?
That's true.
So,
They're only half an hour. Yeah. Another thing to talk about that's a point of advancement for the genre, let's put it that way, I guess, is the special effects and how gory this movie is, which we were watching it with some friends last night, and kind of everybody reacted the same way, which was it's gory, but a lot of stuff actually happens off screen.
Yeah.
More than I remembered.
The gore is like, this is a weird way to describe it, but it's like static. So you see, like, I think it's Brenda gets thrown through her body gets thrown through the window, and she's clearly been like beaten and bloody, and she's
you
dead.
don't even see her die.
Yeah, but you don't see her die, and like a lot of, you get a throat cut here and there, or somebody stabbed in the gut, but you don't. It's sort of like, it's not until somebody else finds their body later that they're kind of gored up, and it's this weird, like, you don't see it in process, you only see the end result.
Yeah, it's actually kind of nice. I think, again, the way it differs from the later movies is the later movies turn into let's see how interesting we can find a way to kill somebody and show all of it.
Yeah.
And this one has, it's really got, well, Annie gets her throat cut open pretty graphically, but it's really got one like showpiece, which is the, well, I guess technically two. It's got 3 showpieces. The one where Annie gets her, Annie gets her throat cut. Mrs. Voorhees gets her head cut off, but that's all had. No, everybody's seen that before. Right. But the big one is Kevin Bacon getting the arrow through his neck from under the bed, which is so fantastic. Great. Yeah,
it's one of my. I think it's actually one of my favorite kills.
Like, it's great. Yeah.
In one of these sort of like movies from this era and this genre, because it's very, very simple, but it works really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a later one where they kind of rip it off and do something very similar again. But yeah, it's I think what this movie does differently, and it actually works, is it uses instead of making it a highlight reel of ways to kill people, it uses the people who have been killed as shock points. So you don't see how Ned dies, but what you do see, and I think the reveals of these dead people are generally really, really good. You do see Kevin Bacon and Marcie start making out on the bottom bunk bed, and then they kind of pan up and you see Ned's on the top bunk with his throat cut, but they don't know he's there. So you get that little Alfred Hitchcock suspense stuff going. They do a great one later where she goes outside and closes the door, and one of the guys is like pinned to the door with arrows, like bow and arrows.
Yep.
Like they use it in that way as sort of I guess it's kind of like a jump scare, but it's really not. But they use it in a more effective way, I think, to build and release tension than just like, this is the part where Jason cuts the guy who's doing a handstand in half dick first.
Yeah, I appreciate that in this movie it's not like increasingly complex Rube Goldberg's machine style kills.
Right.
Like yeah, and I'm trying to think of like, because they're not exactly used as jump scares, they're more used as like, I don't want to say set pieces, but I can't think of a better term. They're like, but yeah, like the horror is in what has happened to them, not like just watching gore.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I mean, like, one thing I do love in that like scene you mentioned where Ned's body is on the top bunk while Kevin Bacon and Marcie are getting intimate on the bottom bunk.
Mm-hmm.
Once Marcie leaves to go to the bathroom and Kevin Bacon is kind of getting comfortable and he's sort of lying there, something drips on his face.
Yeah.
And you think as the audience that he's going to stand up and discover Ned and freak out and then he's going to get killed. Mm-hmm. And instead it's just like, boop, arrow through the bed.
Yeah, I think the biggest skill that these guys displayed in this is understanding how to play with the audience in that way, in a way that is more sophisticated than what it becomes later on, where it just turns into screaming and running. And this is the part where we cut somebody's head off right in full camera. I think they are a bit more inventive with the way they handle things, which I'm sure is not just filmmaking technique as much as it's probably budgetary, where I'm sure they probably didn't have the money to do all that stuff they do later.
That's a good point.
But even at the end, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
I was going to say, even at the end, despite it being a clear, let's say, influence from Carrie, they push it as far as they possibly can before they have Jason jump up out of the water and they grab her. Like, the sun is out, the cops are showing up, the music is swelling, like the happy music is swelling. And they, I saw someone mention that they even framed the shot as though leaving enough room at the top of the frame for where the credits would go. So like you subliminally assume that the credits are going to roll now.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, they push it as far as they can, and then they hit you with that final jump scare thing, which I think, how do you feel? How do you feel about that one compared to Carrie?
So I think the one in Carrie is more successful for a couple reasons. Mm-hmm. Part of it being, I think that actress is a stronger actress. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a certain inner logic to the movie Carrie that, you know, like it or dislike it, there's a certain style throughout that movie where that weird ending scene with the kind of Carrie's version of the final girl walking up to the ruins of the house and laying down the flowers in this sort of like kind of floaty, soft focus shot. It feels weird, but it goes along with some of the earlier weirdness you see throughout the movie. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Friday the 13th, I'm not saying I dislike it in this movie, but it definitely feels weird when it makes that switch, to her kind of lounging in the canoe in the middle of the lake. Like, it's just tonally very different than the rest of the movie, and like the music's very different than the rest of the movie. And I mean, it's definitely it still gets you. Like, if you're not expecting it, it definitely still works on you that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, Jason, the kid who is Jason, just looks grotesque and awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
When he jumps out of the water. So
yeah, and
pros and cons.
I would also say that it's really the only real jump scare in the movie, because I would define, I don't know how you would define a jump scare, but I would define a jump scare as a sequence like that where something unexpected breaks a silence that isn't then followed by more action. It's usually just a sting that's not followed by action that comes after it. It usually that usually kind of dials back down. So it's like that thing where it's like someone taps somebody on the shoulder and they go, "Blah!" And then usually after that they go, "Oh, it's just you," and then they talk for a while. Or the mirror gag, where you close the mirror and you see somebody behind you and you go, "Ah!" And then you turn around and there's nobody there. So then the energy goes back down. It's just a artificial adrenaline shot to make sure you're still awake. Whereas most of the stuff they do in this movie is in service of anything that comes close to a jump scare is generally in service of ratcheting up the tension or the action of the scene, which I think is nice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually think that this movie, in a lot of ways, avoids some of the ways they could have done more jump scares. They choose not to. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm thinking specifically the scene with the snake in the cabin.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Like, you see that snake when you're watching it way before she does. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they could have very easily reversed that and had her, I forget exactly what she's doing. If she's like getting changed or like standing there brushing her hair or something. She could have been, sitting brushing her hair, and the snake could have slithered across her lap, and we could have gotten this kind of cheap jump scare out of it.
Right.
And they choose not to do that. And even with Ralph in the pantry, when crazy Ralph shows up in the pantry, it's immediately after the cop comes by and says, "Look, crazy Ralph is somewhere around here."
Right. Yeah.
Don't worry about him. Send him home. His wife is worried.
Yeah, I didn't know he was married. God,
I love that detail.
God bless that woman.
I love it.
He was just there looking for a can of chili or something. He was probably hungry.
Look, he's a messenger of God.
How do you feel about Mrs. Voorhees as a killer at the end when they finally do reveal? Which I didn't realize how much time you spend with her at the end. In my memory, it was just like the reveal comes and then it's over fairly quickly. But you get a decent couple minutes of cat and mouse with her.
Yeah, which I will admit is my least favorite part of the whole movie. I don't know. It feels like it just goes a little long. Like,
yeah, it definitely does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like for me anyway, I feel like the energy that they get from that reveal kind of just like plateaus pretty quickly.
Yeah, I wish they had put it closer to the end, because I feel like it would have been a better crescendo, a better use of that sort of reveal. But I don't know. I'm very conflicted with the Mrs. Voorhees as killer.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you wanted to talk about this, so please go into it.
I did because I on the one hand, I kind of love that it is this like sort of middle-aged average woman. Mm-hmm. Like you walk by that lady on the street, you are behind her in the checkout line at the grocery store. She just looks like your friend's mom from middle school.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's pretty much it. She's very unassuming, and I kind of love that. Like, I kind of love that it's this like middle-aged woman who is given this role as this sort of terrifying, extremely physical, extremely dangerous killer. I think that's really, really rare in these movies that are so dominated by these like kind of shrouded or deformed or masked male figures.
And she was known primarily, Betsy Palmer was known primarily as more of like a girl next door type of actress in fairly light movies, I think, to the point, so much so that when this movie came out, Gene Siskel in his review was so angry at her for taking a role like this in a movie like this that he actually published her home address and encouraged people to write her letters and telling her how much they also disagreed with her choice. He doxed her, basically.
Fuck you, Gene Siskel.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so for all the reasons that Gene Siskel hates it, I like it.
Right.
However, on a practical level, how is it possible? Like, I just don't buy that this woman who doesn't seem like she's she doesn't seem like she's actually like a triathlete or something.
Right.
How is she physically capable of doing all of this? And I know you can kind of like, oh, well, you know, when people are under intense emotions and the hormones in the human body can do blah, 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 you know, women can lift cars off of their children. But I just can't like suspend my questioning of it enough to kind of get beyond it. Like, I can justify it in a couple ways, like with Steve Christie, because he knows her. She even talks about how she's known his family for all this time. And, you know, you see him in the rain at night kind of run into her near the camp down the road, and he says, "Oh, what are you doing out here?" And he kind of walks up to her because he's familiar with her, so he's not expecting it. So she's able to stab him. Like, that one makes sense. But in some of the other ones, like with Annie, who is this like young, healthy, she's been like backpacking her way to this place, and she can't outrun this like 55-year-old woman in the woods.
Right. Well, to be fair, if I had to play devil's advocate, Annie is new to the area, whereas Mrs. Voorhees clearly knows those woods better, so maybe she just knew the shortcut.
Yeah, home turf advantage, I guess.
That does not explain throwing Brenda's lifeless body entirely through a window by herself, though.
Yes, as svelte as Brenda is, that is still quite a feat for even a very, very strong person.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
so I don't know. There's a lot of like, if you look at it too closely and you take it all too seriously, you can start poking holes in a lot of her kills and like, how does she kill so and so and then get back down to her Jeep to drive it up the road that quickly?
Yeah.
Like, well, I don't know.
One of the questions it brings up for me, well, first of all, if you think that's bad, wait till we get to part 2, which opens with have you seen part 2?
Oh God, a long time ago, yeah.
Well, I don't think this isn't gonna ruin anything for you to tell you that Alice has a very brief cameo at the beginning of part 2.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the movie starts with Jason, who we find out to be Jason Voorhees, fully grown and murderous, goes to her house.
Yes.
Somehow finds out A, her name, B, where she lives, C, how to get there.
Maybe Gene Siskel told him.
I know, apparently, yeah, maybe he did. And he goes there to kill her. Before the rest of the movie starts, then he just goes back to the camp and has to deal with all the other fucking assholes who show up. But it's just one of those things where it's like, if you think about it for 2 seconds, it's like, wait a minute. He went to her house?
Yeah.
It's not like he looked her up on the internet, you know?
Or she came back to the camp to try and do some sort of like, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm going to face my fears. I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell Jason off and I'm going to say, I'm done with this. Goodbye. Like, then he drowns her again.
Right.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't do something like. Apparently, well, we'll get to that story next episode. But
clearly, I should have written Friday the 13th Part 2 before I was born.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been very impressive if you did.
Yeah,
I like Mrs. Voorhees for the same reasons that you do. I am just really impressed with how it's so structurally. I don't know what the word is. It's just like, if you're writing a story like this, having a character you do not see on screen at all for the entire length of the movie show up, and that be your killer, just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's any other movie has Mrs. Voorhees like be the person behind the desk at the 7-Eleven they go to on the way there or something, or that they talk to briefly, who tells them not to go to the camp or something. Or
she's the cook at the diner that Steve's at that night or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or, she works there. Like, she is there with everybody else, and so you think she's one of the victims until she ends up being the killer, that kind of thing. It is very, very rare you will find a killer reveal like this, and even more rare that it actually works and doesn't feel like a huge cheat. And I can't tell if it doesn't feel like a cheat because it works, or if it doesn't feel like a cheat because this was 40 years ago and it's just people are fine with it.
Yeah, that was kind of my question earlier, where it's just like, do we just accept this and gloss over it because this movie is so deeply entrenched in the zeitgeist that we don't question it, or does that reveal actually work? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Like, even the fact that she's not only is she not a character in the movie up until that point that you see, like, you don't get a mention of her.
Nope. They don't mention. They don't mention Jason, I don't think, in any real way. Maybe they do in passing, but it's not like they say, Jason Voorhees, that kid who drowned,
Yeah, it's more like, oh yeah, it was a terrible tragedy when that little boy drowned up there.
Yeah.
And that's the closest you get. There's not even like, oh, as they're cleaning up the cabins, they found an old, 1956 staff photo, and oh, who's that? Oh, that's Mrs. Voorhees. Her boy was the one who died.
They don't go I know what you did last summer route, where it's like, turns out Mrs. Voorhees is actually the mother of someone else who died, who is not the one we think is the killer, but is a different person who died, that she is the mother of that person who is now mad about that. And it's like, what?
But it's interesting because I know what you did last summer is actually kind of the closest thing to a more modern equivalent of this reveal.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Where it is somebody who's like,
but even there,
lost.
Even there, though, when we watched that movie, the thing that killed me is that movie is full of red herrings, and I think that's probably why they don't do red herrings, because I think it would be a cheat if they did. That movie is full of red herrings, and the answer to the question, because that movie is very much about the question of who is doing the killing. The answer to the question is someone who is completely from left field and is a character you have not seen, and therefore I think there it is a cheat, whereas here I think it works miraculously somehow.
I think you're right. I think it has a lot to do with, like, setting up the question, or the thing you want your audience to be mostly concerned with.
Yeah.
And in this movie, the thing the audience is most concerned about when they watch this movie is that these characters who you have been watching, who you are, supposedly rooting for, are getting picked off one by one, and they don't realize it.
Yep.
And so your main concern is just for somebody to realize what's happening and for them to get out of there before they get killed.
Yeah. It's not, at no point does anybody say, we need to figure out who's doing this. It's just about trying not to get killed.
Right. And so you might, as an audience member, you might be curious as you watch this if you don't know what's happening. Mm-hmm. If you live in some sort of vacuum where you had never encountered Friday the 13th before and you're only seeing it for the first time, you might be curious as to who is killing these kids and why, but your central focus is on them trying to survive.
Yes.
Whereas, I Know What You Did Last Summer is 100% them all saying, well, we have to investigate. And the police aren't going to help us, and we can't go to the police. So we're going to do our own investigation, and we're going to look at old newspapers, and we're going to go lie to people and interview them and ask questions to try and figure out who's leaving these weird things and scaring us and killing us. And it's all about figuring out who the killer is before the killer gets you, which just shifts your focus to that question. So when it turns out that you never could have answered the question on your own, no matter what, that's what feels like the cheat in that movie.
Yeah.
And this movie doesn't set you up in that way. And I Know What You Did Last Summer sets you up to fail, no matter how observant you are.
Yes.
Whereas this movie doesn't do that to you.
And I'm interested in talking about this stuff as we go too, because I think what it comes down to is once you start introducing lore to these stories, then the stories end up becoming about exploring the lore, and you kind of lose what makes the movies interesting. Like Halloween, just as soon as they started introducing lore to that stuff, the whole series just nosedives for me. Like I could not give less of a shit about the relationship between Michael and Laurie, or the Cult of Thorn shit that they come up with in the sixth movie. You know what I mean? It's like
I was going to say, look, it's very simple, Clay. It was the Druids.
Yes. Yeah. Nobody knows who they were or what they were doing, but their legacy remains hewn in the living rock of Michael Myers.
Stonehenge, where the demons dwell, where the banshees live and they do live well. Stonehenge, where a man's a man and the children dance to the pipes of Pan.
Just to wrap up, I think we'd be remiss if we before we get there, I'm looking forward to talking about another thing that I'm really fascinated by the cops in these movies. Because I said this as we were watching it last night. There's no reason why the cops should show up to that place at all. Because they come in, lights go, and there's no reason the cops should show up for like a couple weeks. And
I mean,
it makes me wonder, because a running theme in these movies tends to be the cops show up at the end, or the cops kind of like brush stuff off, but they happen to be there at the end after everybody gets killed, and they're like, oh, it's just a shame what happened up at Crystal Lake again. I have this theory. My own headcanon is that the cops know about it and are in on it, and Jason is some sort of like mystical manifestation. Like he's the cost of whatever spell the cops cast to protect the town of Crystal Lake or whatever. But we can look into that more as we go.
Okay, so the kids who the counselors are like sacrificial lambs.
Exactly. Like it happens once every couple years, and then when it happens, the cops are like, "Shit, there's nothing we can do. This is when Jason. This is the culling that Jason must do." Now that's a sequel. They should do that. I would have loved to see that sequel.
All right. No, that actually sounds kind of interesting.
But yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the music. It's obviously iconic in its own right. Not just, I think it's even though it is very a derivative of Psycho, it does create its own. It moves past that by Harry Medfordini creating the ki ma 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 thing, which is arguably a lift from Jaws to some extent, because it's the exact same kind of motif thing that they do in Jaws with the dun 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 dun. But I think it is its own thing, and it is instantly identifiable as from this series and from this character in a way that probably is only really matched by the Halloween theme, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're both just they're very iconic. They're immediately, like you said, immediately recognizable. Like, when you hear that sound, you know exactly kind of like what's about to happen, what you're in for. It can play on you mentally, which I think is really effective.
It's also the only one that you can like do in real life and freak people out. Like if you were in the woods and you started going kee, 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 ma, 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 that would probably freak people out in a way that if you were in the woods and you started going do 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 do, probably wouldn't.
So Clay, I get the feeling you've tried both of these.
Yes.
You're just hanging out in the woods, waiting for hikers to go by, testing them out.
That's what I do in New Hampshire when everybody else is playing board games. I go and stand on the ski trail and do that and see what happens.
I believe that. I can 100% see that.
I don't think I'm going to ask this for the rest of the movies because they are so lowly rated. But for this one, being the original, do you think this deserves to be on the Rotten Horror list, the 200 greatest horror movies list?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just like, quality aside, it's just been such an influential film, and the longevity of it is crazy. I don't understand. It just, if you don't want to put it in your top 10, I agree. If you don't want to put it in your top 50, okay, I can work with that. Mm-hmm. You don't even really want it in your top 100? Yeah, I'd probably say there's 100 horror movies somewhere out there that are better than this one. Mm. But if you're going to have a list that goes up to 200 and covers literally all time, then I think this one should be somewhere on it.
Yeah, I love American Psycho. American Psycho is number 200 on this list. I think American Psycho should be switched out for Friday the 13th based on zeitgeist alone.
Yeah.
It's like it should be the one where it's like, okay, we're going to make, because it's American Psycho has the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score on the list, which is 70. Nothing goes, as far as I know, as I'm scrolling through, it looks like there's nothing below 70 on the list. And I think you need to make an exception for Friday the 13th, just for the cultural impact.
Yeah, especially where, like, as we discussed in our episode about American Psycho, you can argue whether or not that movie even belongs on the list, regardless of how good it is, just
right.
Because genre-wise, is it really a horror movie? That's in my opinion very much an open question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, you don't have, like, I don't know. I just think putting a movie it's even questionable about whether or not it's even a horror movie on the horror movie list and leaving Friday the 13th off, it just seems wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to think of a way, what's the final thing we can talk about on this series? And the other show that I listen to that has covered these rates them on a scale of 1 to 13, which is nice, but I don't want to rip that off. I think I would like to rate the protagonists, the final girl scale. I don't know what 1 would be, but I feel like let's say it's a 1 to 10 scale. 1 being I don't know. I'd have to think of something that would find a shitty movie to plug in there, but 10 being Laurie Strode.
Okay.
Where would you put the final girl or protagonist on the list on that scale?
Huh. Well, I mean, she's no Laurie. Mm-hmm. So she's not getting a 10. I don't know. I'd probably give her like a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
I think like she's pretty.
Or maybe instead of doing an arbitrary 1 to Laurie Strode list, maybe we should just do place them in order of the franchise. So like final girl / protagonist, worst to best or something, best to worst or something like that. But
gotcha.
We
we need some comparison fodder
Yeah.
before we can do that.
So, okay, let's stick to the one to Lori for right now, and then
Yeah.
when it's over, we'll go back and we'll do a comparative thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'd say she's, if we're saying 5 is average, like middling, I'd say she's slightly above average. I think she does make some pretty smart choices. She also makes some less smart choices. But she does do a pretty good job of defending herself. She kind of wises up to what's happening real fast.
Yeah.
Like, there's even a moment where I think she's talking to Bill, and she says, "Why don't we just get out of here? Like, why don't we just get in the car and get out of here? I don't like this. We should just go."
Yep.
It's like, oh yeah, you picked up pretty quickly that this is not a good place to be. And yeah, I mean, ultimately she does fight a middle-aged woman on the beach and wrest a machete away from her and chop her entire head off in one swing.
Yeah.
So got to count for something.
Just not easy. It didn't even work for the person that killed Mary Queen of Scots, I don't think. And that guy did that for a living.
Yeah, that was his job.
Yeah.
What about you? Where would you put her?
I think your reasoning has bumped it up a little bit for me, because I didn't think that I think, like, character-wise, I think she's above average, but as far as, like, dealing with the situation, I didn't think she was that impressive. However, she does handle it about as well as a person who is very much not expecting this to happen could handle it.
Yeah.
She gets some good shots in. I feel like she's kind of ineffectual generally, though, and I think it's part of it is due to the fact that you don't really know that she's the main character, so she doesn't really stand out.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very flat as a character. She doesn't have any strong kind of personality traits that really shine through for so much of the movie, so it is sort of like, yeah, she is kind of just there.
Yeah, I would say she's probably right in the middle. Yeah, I think I would probably say a 5 for her.
Okay. Yeah.
Should one be Billy from Society? Is he like the worst protagonist we've come across so far in one of these?
He is the worst final girl in all movies.
Yeah.
Oh God, just sweaty and incoherent.
Yeah. I'll think of a good one for the one spot, but
okay.
I think that's going to do it for our coverage of the original Friday the 13th, the first in our 12 or possibly 13 part series talking about the Friday the 13th franchise. I'm very much looking forward to watching part 2. I'm very much looking forward to watching part 3, because you and I are going to watch, COVID be damned, are going to watch it in 3D at my house, which I'm very excited about.
I will show up in a full hazmat suit. I will test beforehand. We will make it happen. I have to see this marvel of engineering happen.
Excellent. But thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys very much for being patrons of the show. We couldn't do this stuff without you. Very much appreciated. And we will see you next time with Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Bye, everyone.